Alright, time to follow up the previous video on former Iron Maiden members. Adrian Smith and Bruce Dickinson both left Iron Maiden for a brief time and then returned in 1999, turning the band into a six-piece. But why did they leave in the first place? What did they do and why did they come back? That's what this video is all about. Now, I'll be intercutting between the two stories here because they happen around the same time, so sorry if that seems confusing. Now let's start at the very beginning, more precisely when Adrian Smith joined Iron Maiden. So, as I mentioned in my former Maiden members video, Adrian Smith joined the band in 1981, replacing Dennis Stratton, but Iron Maiden had been courting him before. The reason Smith resisted joining Maiden earlier was actually because he had his own band. It was called Adrian, and in the band Smith not only played guitar and wrote the songs, he also sang them. Yup. Unfortunately, although Adrian had released a few singles, they'd never managed to lock down a record deal for a full album or a long play. By the point Maiden were asking Smith to replace Stratton, Adrian was going nowhere fast and Maiden were becoming one of the biggest acts of the heavy metal scene. So Smith came along for the ride. For the first two albums, Smith didn't contribute much to Maiden's songwriting, but starting from Peace of Mind, he was beginning to find his place in the band and building up his confidence. In 1982, Bruce Dickinson joined the band, and he was very gung-ho from the start and made a huge impact to Maiden's sound and image. Then came the World Slavery Tour. It was Maiden's biggest and baddest tour up to that point. The band had to take a year off to recuperate and work on their next album. But Smith didn't let up. It was here that we had the beginnings of his solo career. He got together with his former Adrian bandmates and Nico McBrain and formed a group with the very catchy name of The Entire Population of Hackney. This band didn't record any albums, though some bootleg recordings have survived. It was a pub band. Smith and company would perform songs with Smith playing guitar and singing. In 1986, Maiden released Somewhere in Time, and this had three big impacts on the band. Number one, Smith wrote half the album, with Steve Harris writing the other half. Number two, one of the singles featured a track on the B-side called Reach Out, which had Smith singing, backed by Bruce Dickinson. And three, the album did not feature songs by Bruce Dickinson. That will be important later. Basically, getting to stretch out his wings not just as a guitar player and songwriter, but also as the lead figure of a band, Smith found the confidence to announce that he would leave Iron Maiden at the end of 1989 to start up his own band. That would become ASAP, for Adrian Smith and Project. In the meanwhile, Bruce was a little hurt that his songs were rejected from Somewhere in Time, but he got back on the saddle with Seventh Son, where he was again one of the principal writers. Around this time, a movie was coming out called Nightmare on Elm Street 5, and EMI wanted Bruce to record a single for it. Bruce agreed if he was allowed to also record his own solo album, and EMI agreed. Bruce finished the song in about 5 minutes in the place where all great songs are written, in his bathroom. And that song became Bring Your Daughter to the Slaughter. Ironically, the song didn't end up on Bruce's first album though, so he re-recorded it with Iron Maiden. Oh yeah, and he also brought in Yannick Gers as Smith's replacement. Here we come to one of the biggest chapters of the story, 1990. It was the year ASAP would release their debut album, Silver and Gold. Bruce would release his solo debut, Tattooed Millionaire, and Iron Maiden would release their 8th album, No Prayer for the Dying. Two of these albums, despite some mixed critical reception, would go on to enjoy commercial success. Silver and Gold was not one of them. The album was far more traditional commercial rock, and though I personally like the songs, Smith perhaps forgot to take into account that in 1990, there was a lot of commercial rock. ASAP would not release another album. The band broke up, and Smith would leave the music industry for 2 years. In the meantime, Tattooed Millionaire was a success, giving Bruce confidence that he would potentially have a career outside Iron Maiden. He would still stay on board for their Fear of the Dark album in 1992. It's never been terribly clear why Dickinson decided to leave, and the truth is probably that there were many reasons. For one, there had always been creative tension between himself and Steve Harris. And although most of the time the band's music was better for it, it was becoming obvious Dickinson wanted to try to do things for himself. Secondly, he wanted to see if he could have a career as a musician, and not just as the singer for Iron Maiden. There was another thing that emerged in 1992. Adrian Smith once again got together with his former bandmates and formed The Untouchables. It was another pub band playing rock, which never released a single album, but it gave Smith the confidence to return to music. In 1993, during the Live at Donington concert, Smith rejoined Iron Maiden briefly on stage for an encore. In 1994, Bruce's second solo album would be released. The previous year, Bruce left Maiden, signed with Mercury Records, recorded a whole album's worth of music, then dumped it all because he didn't like the sound of it. He then brought in Roy Z from Tribe of Gypsies, and this ended up producing Balls of Picasso. The Though the album only sold moderately, the record label collapsing soon after it came out, one single became a huge hit in South America, Tears of the Dragon. Bruce had proven he could still write hits, but he still needed a band. Speaking of bands, Adrian formed a new one. It was called Psycho Motel and released State of Mind in 1995. There were two big differences to Smith's previous album. Number one, this one was honest-to-God metal again. And number two, he wasn't singing anymore, which is sad. But Hans Olive Solly did a good job, and the band was off and running. In 1995, Bruce decided that he was done mucking about as a solo act. He would cut his hair short, form a new band, and release an album under the band's name. It came out in 1996 and was called Skunkworks. But Castle Records wanted to slap Bruce's name on top to help sales. The album was successful, but unfortunately the Skunkworks band broke up after the tour. Bruce was on his own again. Both Dickinson and Psycho Motel would release albums in 1997. Dickinson's album came out earlier and it was called Accident of Birth. Besides teaming up with Roy Z again, he also asked Smith to come along for the ride. For Smith, it was a nice meeting of an old friend while he tried to get Welcome to the World done. There was one huge hiccup. He lost his singer. I mean, he was busy, he didn't die or anything. The second album vocalist was Andy Macon. Accident of Birth was far more successful, so Smith dropped his old band and permanently joined Bruce's support. Bruce Smith and Roy released a second album the following year. The same year, Iron Maiden released Virtual 11. The following year, Blaze Bayley was fired, and both Dickinson and Smith rejoined their former band. That's all from me for now. Until next time, up the irons.